Hey, what's going on, Scrap Pack? So here we are playing Scraplords Bounty Bash, and this is the newest addition to the Scraplords TCG. So in this edition, these cards are made up of character cards, which are typically denoted by bounty value, and the bounties are down in the lower, well, I guess to you, it'll be on the left-hand side. But if you're looking at the card from my perspective, it's on the bottom right. Anyway, let's just say it's an opposite bottom from the attack and defense value up at the top here. So we have attack and defense value, which is pretty standard. We have the tag, the scrap tag here that denotes the name, and then we have the skills and or abilities section here that kind of tells you a little bit about what the card is capable of or what it can do. And then typically we have a badge. This one doesn't have a specific badge. These badges, again, let's see if I can find one here that has one. Not quite important, but this one here, you can see it has a badge. That badge means that it works in combination with another card that gives it certain abilities. And that's kind of like the combination effect of the cards themselves. Onto the game. So with the game, we have the decks already divided. We already shuffled. We already dealt the initial hand. I have 6 cards, meaning that I have 5 cards that from my initial draw, and then I have 1 additional card that I initiated my draw phase, and that's the action-free draw. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play a card. Now, when I play a card, the cards themselves, well, it's probably easier to use these. The cards themselves have bounty value. You can see it represented here by the letter B. That kind of looks like it has like a, I guess, a currency value stripe in it. So with that B, with that little currency value stripe, different cards have different values. There's some with 2, very rarely do you see them with 3. As of right now, I haven't released any within the 164 cards that are part of this expansion. So again, the bounty value that goes up to 3, extremely limited. With that being said, it's typically 1s and 2s. So single bounty value and double bounty values. That's really what we're dealing with. So when I initiate a card or activate a card on my turn, upon activation at a gate, I have movement equal, automatic movement equal to the bounty value of the card. Sorry, kind of hard to see, but so when I activate a card, this card in particular has 1 bounty value. That means I can move 1 position upon activation. Now that's an action-free movement based on activation. Now after that initial activation, there's no free movement that pertains to that particular card because again, it's already been activated. With that being said, if I play a card that has 2 bounty value, I don't think, oh yeah I do. So if I play a card that has 2 bounty value on activation, and now again, when I play a card, I can play a card across any one of these 4 gates and introduce and activate a card on any one of them. When I do that, the movement that I gain from activation on this particular card that has 2 bounty value, I'm going to place it down and it gives me 2 movement automatically so I can move 2 tiles ahead. So the activation is 1 action. And within that action, I have an automatic movement of 2. Now, I can pick and choose whether or not I want to use that movement, or I can pick and choose whether or not I want to limit that movement. If I have a bounty, should I say, if I have a card that I'm activating, a character card that I want to activate that has 2 bounty, and say I only want to use 1 movement, I'm only going to use that 1 movement, and that ends that action as far as that initial activation. Now, additional actions really fall back to whether or not you have actions to play. Every round, each player has 3 actions. You have 1 action-free draw, and then you have an additional 3 actions to play the game that you are strategizing for. You can either draw cards per action. So in other words, I can draw 3 cards, and that'll be all 3 actions, or I can mix and match actions. So I can move and initiate a duel, or I can activate, and or I could use in, well, actually, instant cards don't quite qualify. Instants are kind of action-free cards. You can play them in between actions. You can play them on your opponent's turn, and you can play them on your turn. In there, one example of this would be like defensive cards, right? Defensive card would be an instant that you will have in your hand. It needs to be initialized in your hand, otherwise it obviously doesn't qualify, right? So playing it from your hand, it has an instant effect. So if I had something like a defense card, if my opponent is attacking my card, I could instantly play that in response to that initial duel, I guess you would say, that initial attack action. And in response to that, if my opponent has more actions to play on their turn, and the duel isn't quite successful, or should I say the attack isn't quite successful on that action, that player can then add an additional attack value, which is if they have another action to play, they can target the or should I say initialize another attack action using the attack value on the cards that are set like this. So that one in particular is 1. So the orange depicts attack value, and the gray depicts defense value. So if I have 3 actions to play, and I'm an opponent that I'm moving into position and initiating a duel only takes 1 action. And when you initialize a duel on that action, you are essentially attributing whatever attack value your card has, you're automatically attacking with that value. And then you can add to that if you, again, how can I say, if you pretty much if that's pretty much your directive for that attack, you would have to make sure that you set your attack first, and then in there your opponent can respond. So in other words, if I'm attacking on this action, on one action, I'm going to move into position and I'm going to initialize an attack value of 1, but the attack, the defense that this card has is 2. So in other words, the attack and the action, the attack value within that action is negated because it doesn't meet or break the defense value of the card it's attacking. Now, with that being said, you can initialize a duel, move into position, and duel for position, and be negated, and then you can move on to your secondary action phase, should you want to, and kind of add to it. Or you can take all your actions that you have at your disposal. So if I have 3 actions and it's my turn and I'm moving into position, that's 1 action, but I also have to denote that I'm going to use multiple actions in that 1 movement in order to qualify additional attack value. So in other words, when I'm moving into a position, I can say, well, in moving into that position, I'm going to use 3 actions to multiply my attack to a 3, in opposed to just using the 1 individually per action, which is a different strategy if you're going for kind of like milking, I guess, your opponent's defense cards or their defense actions, or should I say their defense in general. And in there, again, different strategy that applies when you're combining actions into 1 movement or combining actions into 1 attack, and then you're adding buffers to it or whatever you want to do. But again, it really depends on the strategy that you're playing. But the rules of the game dictate that when you move into position, it automatically triggers 1 attack value that goes directed at the target position. And in there, you've already initiated a duel. And in this case, where the action is not, the action is pretty much negated, or should I say the attack is negated because the defense is greater than the attack, then there's not much you can do there, but you're still challenging the position until your turn is over. So you don't necessarily just bump into the position and then just get bounced back and now you're back in adjacent position. When it's your turn and you're challenging for position, you're going to challenge that position until your turn is over or until your opponent does something that disqualifies or makes you discard your card. And in there, in this scenario where, okay, I'm going to initiate a duel, and I'm going to say, okay, well, in that that action, I'm going to combine multiple attacks. So I'm going to not only move into position, but I'm going to use all of my actions, all 3 of my actions, 1 to move, which qualifies 1 attack, and then an additional 2 that is, again, going to be attributed to that 1 turn, I guess you would say. So I'm summarizing and kind of like condensing all my actions into 1 action. And in there, that card, the defending card, now has to respond to an attack of 3, because again, moving into position qualifies 1 attack value, and then pretty much directing that 2 additional actions that I have left in my turn are going to be added to that attack. And in there, now that buffs it to a 3. Now, also within there, I can, again, another strategy to use would be to tease or milk the opponent for defense cards, to kind of poke at their defense and see whether or not they have defense that could negate my attack, or you want to kind of see how that, duel can play out. But it can play out on multiple levels. Like, let's bring it to another one. One is I'm going to keep my card into position, and I'm going to use an adjacent attack. My adjacent attack is not a ranged attack. My adjacent attack means that I'm going to attack any position that is in front of me, in back of me, or to the left or right of my current position. So my current position being here, this card, I can attack back, or I can attack forward, which is the position of the occupied space, or I can attack the side positions. Now, a ranged attack means that I'm using a ranged buff to access certain, how can I say, certain cards that are 2 movement, typically 2 plus movement away. In other words, it'll look something like this. So a ranged attack would be me attacking this spot over here, or a spot over here, or a spot over here. Essentially, anything that takes 2 movement to navigate would be considered a ranged attack. There are cards that specify that they are ranged buffs, so you can essentially attack from position to a ranged position, and that only takes 1 action. And in there, you also have the responsibility to go and claim the card if you have defeated it. Now, defeated cards that are in range typically get flipped upside down to denote that they have been defeated and that they can be collected. The player cannot revive these cards. The only way that these cards can be claimed or captured is if a card, an opponent, or an ally moves into that position, and instead of initiating a duel, what you're doing is you're initiating a salvage or a claim. So you're going to claim that card, and when you claim that card, you can put it into your vault, put it into your backlot, etc., etc., and earn those bounty points or those bounty value. So now that's for the ranged attack. So adjacent attack is somewhat seemingly like a ranged attack, except you're attacking the positions that you can move to in 1 action. So with that being said, instead of dueling from a position, in other words, moving into that position and denoting that I want to take the position, and automatically triggering 1 attack, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in an adjacent space, and I'm going to use the same attack value, but now I'm going to direct it at the adjacent position. And the role-playing aspect of it is kind of like you have to kind of imagine that any cards that are within 1 space of range are automatically subject to, or could be automatically subject to be attacked, or should I say not automatically, but could be targeted to be attacked. So you don't necessarily have to move into position. The moving into position is one feature of the game that allows a player to not only initiate a duel and potentially take the space, but in so doing, what you're also doing is claiming the card. So if you win a position, if you win a duel for position, you get to claim the card that you took the position of, and that becomes your bounty value. So again, there's multiple reasons why you'd want to duel for position, but sometimes you want to kind of like maintain some kind of distance because you might have cards that are, you know, backed, or they have the team up effect, where, you know, again, if it was a situation like this where these back three cards, let me move this up a little bit. In this situation where these back three cards here, right, that kind of make this L, these back three cards, if I was to duel for position on to this card, win the card, that card would be taken out and I would gain that position. But now I'm in between two adjacent space. Well, I'm in between two cards, and these cards on the next action can do what is called a team up effect. And the team up effect means that they can use one action. The player can use one action to attack with both cards at once, and then use an additional action to move into space. So to move into that space and claim the card. So again, now they're getting the value of two attacks for one action, and that's the benefit of having your cards adjacent to each other, or allied cards adjacent to each other. Not to mention that there's other combiner effects too, of cards that are next to certain cards that kind of give an attack buff or a skill buff to those cards that are around it. One in particular for this set is called Greynor's Keep, and Greynor's Keep allows you to extend a defense value for Greynor. So Greynor has a defense of 3, and he can share up to 2. And then there's Repair Rally Relay, which certain mechanic cards have the ability to extend that, almost like a lifeline or like a link effect, where again you can have, you know, 3 cards up that can gain from the effect of that card that's way in the back. Or even if I play it at the gate and I have it here, again, if Greynor's Keep was back here, he would share up to 3. And the Repair Rally means that the link, which is the Repair Rally Relay skill that a particular card would have, would again take some of that value and then extend it forward again. So you get now an additional effect, or a chain link effect, with, you know, defense buff or certain attack buffs, or maybe even a movement buff depending on your combination. But that's essentially how the combiner cards can work. Some of them are globally accessible, like the Greynor's Keep. It works with any card, unless the card depicts that it's not a friendly card to Greynor's Keep or other cards. In other words, like, I don't know, like say for instance, maybe the theme is for the card that it's like a Lone Rider, or you know, a Lone Wolf type card, where the card itself doesn't have any kind of combiner effects, because the buff on the card itself is attributed to being more powerful as a solitary card than when it's, you know, within an adjacent space to an ally. Because again, the combination effect, or should I say the card, oh geez, I'm losing my train of thought now. So the card combinations, I guess you can say, or the combiner, there we go, the combiner effect can also be a negative effect for a card that is depicted as being more of a solitary card to be played, if that makes sense. So in other words, there are cards that in the combiner effect could actually respond negatively to that combiner effect. And in there, again, you have dynamic gameplay and different strategies. But the whole point is to claim bounties and claim 8. You claim 8 bounties and you win. Fill up your back lots, or your bounty vaults, whatever you want to call them. I say that because there's certain cards that denote them as vaults. Your back lot is when it's unprotected and it's unsecured. So in other words, there's no real defense that goes into kind of keeping your backlot safe. So if an opponent reaches your gate, they can claim any bounty within your backlot, any one bounty, as a victory trophy, and then claim not only their champion or their, I guess you can say their Hall of Famer or whatever you want to call it. The point is, like, the card that scores gets claimed, and you get to keep that particular card in your bounty and secured in your bounty. But in so doing, in scoring, you can actually earn one bounty from your opponent's backlog should they have one available. There is a condition. The condition is if your opponent has a lock or a vault card in their backlog, typically denoted as bounty vault, or of the likes, or perhaps they have a certain champion of their own that's occupying a particular backlot. They might have the card feature might denote that you would have to defeat that card first in order to claim the bounty. And typically in that scenario, you would claim the card that you defeated. But there's also another card called the Bounty Vault, and the Bounty Vault has a certain defense value, and you essentially just need enough actions or enough attack value to eliminate the Bounty Vault. It gets discarded, and then you get to claim a bounty from there. So there's kind of like a mini game that could happen based on whether or not you reach your opponent's backlot, or you reach your opponent's gate, etc. So yeah, that's essentially the basic mechanics around how to play Scraplords Bounty Bash. And in there's a lot of strategy, collectability, and different ways, different win conditions that you have. But primarily, the win condition is collect 8 bounties and avoid running out of cards. Because if you run out of cards, you are then the loser of the game. So yeah, with that being said, this is Scraplords Bounty Bash. So I hope you got a good little overview as to how the game is played and whether or not it's a game that you want to try out. I suggest you do. I think it's very active and you can be very strategic with your gameplay. I hope that you find this game fun, and I hope you find this game in front of you, between you and your friends, and hopefully you can learn all the nuances of how to become a Scraplord.